Okay. Good evening. Good evening, friends. Oh, it's so great to see so many lovely faces out there. My name is Eileen Fugues. I'm the president and executive director of the National Building Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. And as we get started, I want to make sure we thank our sponsors, the Ravada Foundation of the Logan family and the Anthony and Keiko Greenberg Foundation, for their generous support of Spotlight on Design. For over 20 years, the Spotlight on Design series has provided a unique opportunity to engage with the leading voices from around the world in architecture, urban planning, landscape architecture, and design as they discuss their work, personal perspectives, and the enduring significance of the built environment. The National Building Museum is partnering with the Folger Shakespeare Library for this year's summer block party, The Playhouse. While we have all been tremendously enjoying A Midsummer Night's Dream here in our great hall, just down the street, the Folger is undergoing a complete renovation. And tonight we'll get an exclusive peek behind the curtain into the innovative work going into the redesign of a DC cultural treasure. And it's now my distinct pleasure to both welcome and introduce our speakers tonight, Michael Witmore, Stephen Kieran, and Anneliza Kaufer. So Michael Witmore is, oh yeah, okay, we can do that. I like that. Michael is the 7th director of the Folger Shakespeare Library and has served in his position since July 2011. He was formerly professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and before that, associate professor of English at Carnegie Mellon University. Among his more recent projects, he launched the working group for the digital inquiry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and organized the Pittsburgh Consortium for Medieval and Renaissance Studies. Stephen Kieran, a partner at KieranTimberlake, is an international leader in sustainable design. He was the design partner for the first LEED Platinum K-12 school at Sybil Friends here in DC. His recent projects include a new school of engineering at Brown University and a renovation and addition to art and music facilities at Wellesley College. He is currently working on the Kennedy Center master plan and exhibition in addition to the renovation of the Folger Shakespeare Library. And Anneliza Kaufer is an associate at OLIN. Her work focuses on integrating engineering systems within public space and leveraging the landscape value of those systems. Since joining OLIN in 2014, Anneliza has contributed to a number of urban design and master plan projects. She worked closely with the City of Alexandria as project manager for the design and implementation of an urban space park space along the Alexandria waterfront, and is currently working on the National Desert Storm Desert Shield Memorial in Washington, D.C. So I welcome you all, and let's get the conversation started.
Thanks very much, Eileen. Oh, I get the slide clicker. So we were discussing this event tonight, the three of us, and saying this is probably the first time we've presented this project where there wasn't someone in the audience who could say no. We've presented this project to, I think, 6 different zoning and other agencies in the course of getting to the point where we are. And that's been quite a journey. But now we are building, and we have a chance to talk to the architect who really thought this through with us and inspired us. And Anneliza has come from OLIN to help us understand how the landscape is part of this project. So I'm really excited that we're going to be able to present this to you. My role here is to say a few words about the why, because the how is coming. Here's the why. When I arrived in 2011, the Folger had so many strengths, but one of the weaknesses was that its physical building and infrastructure really wasn't prepared to put together the pieces of our mission. So you know that we're a world-class research library, we train teachers, we do exhibition work, we perform on the first permanent Elizabethan stage in the United States. So it really is a full surround of the mission that is embodied in our building. And when you look at our building, which continues to inspire me, you see a really wonderful mix of the monumental. Look at where it is. It's in the viewscape of the U.S. Capitol. It's made of white marble. It has so many classical references in its structure. But it is also somewhat domestic. It was designed to mimic some of the great English country houses like Hadfield House and other places that were made famous by let's say, those merchant ivory films about things happening in big weekends in English country houses, but soaring ceilings in wood-paneled spaces, a library that reminds many of our visitors of the Oxbridge libraries, and a beautiful intimate theater. So we knew that we had beautiful pieces in this historic building that express the different areas of the mission, but we also knew that the building was an obstacle in terms of the access it provides to our visitors, both physical, it is a physically inaccessible space, we're changing that, but also in terms of the perception of the degree to which this was a public place that you could come and visit. So we landed on creating a master plan and then arriving at a project. And I wanted to say a few words about how we got from a strategic plan to a master plan to this project. So I believe we have a couple of slides, which I have the power to advance here. Here you see in black and white a 1932 picture of the Folger when it opened. The architect is Paul Cray, and I'll say a little more about him, but you can see it's a stately building. It stands back from its site. It's appropriate to a writer with monumental reach. And in the late 20s, when it was being designed, the talk around Washington was that Washington would have a third monument to an incredible, inspiring figure for Americans. The first was Washington, the second was Lincoln, and the third, lined up right on the east-west axis, would be Shakespeare. What a startling idea. He wasn't quite an American citizen, but he was foreign enough to allow Americans to fill in the gaps that they needed to feel that this writer could speak to a country that was inventing its own traditions. So here are some shots, again, from the 30s and 40s of the original spaces. You see the monumental reading room on the left with its beautiful chandeliers. You see the Great Hall on the lower right, which we know the pattern book that Paul Cray drew it from. It's from a mixture of English country houses, mostly Hadfield House. And then you see the theater, which is a functioning, and we believe was designed to be a functioning theater. Okay, the mission is to put cats in roughs. The strategic plan of 2013 had 4 overarching goals. First, to build the research library of the 21st century. Second, is to make the appreciation of Shakespeare and the study of his early modern world a pathway to public understanding of the humanities. So that means taking a collection, taking performances, taking conversations about the history of how this art form came to be, history of poetry, and indeed all the things that kind of came into our worlds in the 1700s, and turning them into points where people can talk to each other about where we are as a people and where we're going. That is the overriding and I think highest priority in our mission. We wanted to strengthen the Folger staff and support continued good governance. And finally, we wanted to provide the spaces for research and public engagement. That word spaces had a lot of consequences for us. We started with a master plan conducted by KieranTimberlake, which did an analysis of our space. And even if you can't, I don't have my glasses on, see what the labels are on those bars, you'll notice an increase in total volume there. The areas that are showing the greatest expansion are the areas for public engagement in the blue and the green, and the area for staff support in red. That's where we got a lot of our net space, including circulation, access, amenities, and there's additional investments which are not shown in this graph in sustainable vault spaces for our collection. Just a couple of pictures by way of biography. That is William Shakespeare on the left, a postcard of the Folger from the 30s, and then Henry and Emily Folger on the right. These are some of the players in what became a history of design in our building. Of course, Mr. and Mrs. Folger very active in shaping the spaces. Just a couple remarks about the building. The building is covered in writing, and the writing is the words of William Shakespeare and others that are quoted in the famous first folio of Shakespeare's plays. That's the 1623 printing of 36 of Shakespeare's plays. But the building was supposed to look kind of like a book. And as we look at how the design developed, One of the reasons why Cray was selected by the Folgers was because he had experience in creating memorials, and he had done an important war memorial to World War I soldiers in France. And if you look closely at the early designs of our building, one interesting thing is that the name on the building is Folger Shakespeare Memorial Library. And in fact, that is still the name that's printed on our checks. That is the legal name of the entity. It was conceived as a living memorial to one of England's great writers, to be situated in the heart of government in the United States. But Steve and Anneliza and others, I think, will want to talk about what it means to try to build a memorial that is alive. And that is very much something that we've tried to think about as we embarked on this project. So, master planning goals, we wanted to honor the Folgers' gift to the nation. We wanted to welcome and inspire a new generation. We wanted to make access to the Folgers spaces and collections seamless, provide secure spaces for the Folgers' growing collection, invite visitors to explore the collections, I really need glasses, don't I? Provide ambitious collaborative and individual workspaces, provide scholarly research for the 21st century, theater, I'm really awful, theater, and staff. You would think that I had these all memorized, but in fact, some of those keywords have evolved over time. I think some of the presiding keywords, the spirits that circulate around the project, have been access and inspiration, and that's very much built into the plan that we finally resolved on in our project. So the site assessment showed a couple of difficulties. Physically an inaccessible building. The major east-west axis, which is the Great Hall, was often shut. It was shut for at least a month or more, a year, making the building impassable. And that space, which was designed by Paul Cray to have full daylight through sweeping windows, was actually our only rare book and manuscript exhibition space. It is a terrible idea to expose light-sensitive books and manuscripts to bright daylight. And so when I arrived at the Folger in 2011, those windows were covered in linoleum. That was not a good long-term solution. What we really needed was a solution that simultaneously opened the Folger and made it unambiguously welcoming, but also connected our spaces and provided us the ability to show our collection in appropriate spaces. As with all planning projects, we had options, and they ranged from encasing the front of the site with glass, which was breathtaking, but in the end felt unachievable given the place where we are. So the most exciting part of the master planning and then the project selection process for me was when we were working with the architects, and OLIN was at the table talking about how we could use the landscape to effectively say hello to people. As you transition from the official federal civic spaces of Washington, can you cross a threshold into the Folger and kind of, in a once-upon-a-time fashion, start to go into a more green space, a space of imagination that relaxes you? And could you then, and this was Steve's insight, which kind of floored us all, could you take the landscape and pass it through the building so that there is one continuous journey that's going from the corner of our site all the way through into the heart of our exhibitions? It was an elegant and simple idea, and it won the day. So that's how we arrived at the project that we have now. You'll see it in detail later, but it does involve a simultaneous east and west entrance through the landscape into a new set of public galleries and a pavilion space, which will welcome our visitors, but will also allow us to exhibit hundreds of rare books and manuscripts that have never been seen before. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve now, who will describe how we get there.
Thank you, Michael, and real delight to be with you this evening and share some observations of the process that we have been through for several years now on this remarkable project. So What Michael presented to you was a series of nested plans. A strategic plan is the broadest. That is the goals of the institution for its future. Nested within that is a physical master plan as a portion of those strategic goals. And a third piece nested within it were some design principles that came out of that master plan that we were asked to accommodate in the new design. These were based on where we stood at the end of the master planning process, and one of them was certainly more gallery, less circulation. The idea was really to delineate and differentiate the galleries from the circulation space, which was not where we left the master plan. That at the core of this exhibit would be a visible vault that would contain the Folger's collection of 82, I think that's right, first folios. The largest collection of those in the world is in the Folger's possession. They're all in their own way unique because of who owned them over the years mostly. They're going to now, for the first time in the history of the institution, be out on display for the public at the heart of the exhibit. We're going below grade. Ceiling height was something we really wanted to go after, and they certainly wanted flexibility for the future, and for obvious reasons, little to no daylight because of the value of the manuscripts. So a little bit of a word on a less directed way of beginning. Shakespeare himself actually really provides the insight for this. He is well known for hardly ever inventing a plot. He took his plots from other prior sources. Sometimes they were histories, sometimes other dramatic works. But he viewed himself as a renovator of his predecessors. And he renovated so well that people forgot where these things began, and we thought we continue to believe they all began with him, but most of the stories have prior origins. So in a way, that's what we're doing here. Our prior origin is the founding of the institution, completed in 1932 by Paul Cray, very, very hugely admired predecessor where I come from in Philadelphia, teacher of Louis Kahn and many other remarkable architects, and a great architect in his own right. Hugely admired predecessor for us. But in a way, what we're doing with this work is what Shakespeare does to those plays. We're trying to make it anew for a new time and a new age, so that it can go forward and so those memories can live into the future. It is a living memorial with all the complexity that comes with those ideas of memory, which we all tend to view as stable. It's not. And life. And this institution is all about that. So the fundamental idea of renewal here is to add a building underneath the building. And if you look carefully at the diagram here, the sectional diagram, you'll see a section of the Great Hall, the remarkable space Michael showed, along with the library. And beneath that, we're basically hollowing out a new building that extends out onto East Capitol Street underneath the plinth of the original building. That is the fundamental design intervention. And it is in conversation with all of the historic spaces and in support of them, and makes them better and gives them a more vibrant future. That's fundamentally what we're trying to do through the changes made here. The big move that Michael described is really simple, as all wonderful design solutions ultimately are. It is basically to carry the landscape from the corners, the east and west corners of East Capitol Street on the Library of Congress side and on the more residential side to the east, into, under, around, and through the whole of the new addition, welcoming the public through this landscape and buildingscape into the world of William Shakespeare. The Folger is now a collection of remarkable rooms: the Great Hall, the theater, the library itself, and the Founder's Room, all remarkable individual rooms in their own right. So it's a building of rooms and of interiors. And we, with OLIN, thought of our work as a suite of new rooms. The rooms begin out in the landscape to either side. They welcome you in from the corners and bring you gently down, spiraling into the earth, into a suite of interior rooms that include two major new exhibition halls: the Rose Gallery, the Shakespeare Exhibition Gallery. The Shakespeare Exhibition Gallery is the one that will contain all of the first folios, as well as other engaging, interpretive, interactive exhibits that bring Shakespeare forward for a new time and renovate him and the building, in essence, for new audiences. So that's our fundamental mission that we're after on this. And we believe that the conversation with Cray is a rich one. He made rooms. We're making rooms. They're interconnected. They add to, not change each other. They expand the story, not contract the story. That's what great renovation is, whether it's of a prior idea that becomes a play or an existing building. It's about a conversation across time with admired predecessors, expanding their work for new times and new audiences.
All right, thank you. So from the landscape, we really approach this as an essential and integral part of the overall site and museum design. And we pulled inspiration from Shakespearean writings that reference the landscape quite frequently, also describing the environment in vivid detail to really bring the reader into the environment and feel part of the space. So this is in plan showing the sequence of rooms that Stephen referenced. So you can really see how there's the west side of the site with a west garden and the east garden connected through with the exhibition space below. And the idea of these meandering paths through the garden that really bring you gently down into the space as this welcoming first room that visitors experience as they enter. We also are restoring this plinth to the original design by Paul Cray. And this is a view looking towards 2nd Street and the Library of Congress. All of these walks that meander through the garden are bringing you down in an accessible way. The first shown here is the only one that requires handrails, and everything else is a very gently sloping walk down with moments to rest, sit, and relax. And also look onto this garden with seasonal interest through color and texture. And then bringing you down to a relocated fountain here that has a puck statue, and into this kind of open waiting area or entrance room before you enter the gallery space beneath. In the garden inspiration, a lot of the plants are native plants with seasonal interest, but we did pull some cues from Shakespeare's writing with plants that are specifically referenced. So these are kind of Easter eggs that someone might find as they move through the garden space, and really a nod to the programming of the interior gallery. And this is the first moment that you would see standing at 2nd Street and looking down into the space. So the gallery or the garden space itself, you've kind of got this meandering garden experience. We pulled a lot of cues from Elizabethan gardens. So this kind of panel of very vibrant, varied texture and color. And then also this element of water down at the base near the entrance. The sound of the water would really be this amazing amenity for visitors. And it's kind of pulling you down, saying, welcome, come on down and enter this gallery. We're also incorporating a poem along the curb. So really looking at this as part of the interior space, and really the programming that's part of the exterior is seamlessly tied with what's happening inside. This is a closer view at that relocated fountain. So the image on the right is the original Puck statue and some of the marble inscriptions and carvings. And so that's actually being relocated and integrated here with the upper pool, and then the water cascades down. And that sound from the moving water cascading, I think, is going to be a really welcoming experience, and kind of adding this whimsical character to the space. And this is a view from the corner of 3rd Street and East Capitol, looking down toward the Capitol building. We're looking at the East Garden here, which is the entrance to the theater side. Programmatically, this can be divided off for theater events, but it's meant to really feel as a fully connected through experience here along Capitol Street. And it's the same strategy with a path kind of walking down here, meandering around the garden, and going down into the entrance. Back on the west side, we're incorporating a small lawn area that people can sit and have lunch, and also sit under the shade of the Magnolia, which we'll talk about, a very special tree that was on the site. You can look from here as just additional urban amenity space. All of this has been opened up and really feels like a public open threshold for the community at large, and also the visitors to the museum. So the Magnolia that I mentioned, you can see in the bottom photo here, if you might be familiar with this tree, it's a very large-scale heritage magnolia that was on the site. And in the photo just above, this was when it was originally planted as part of the planting that went in as the building was constructed back in 1932. So it's been there for a very long time, a very special tree, an amazing character. This leaf was saved and actually was part of the archives. It was the first leaf that fell as the tree was planted. So you can tell that this is a very special tree for the Folger. And this is a video that shows Magnolia on the move. So this was quite a process to move this heritage tree because of the large-scale excavation that was happening to get down to the gallery space. We had to move this tree in order to preserve it. So the process was quite extensive and long. They actually pruned around the tree to get it prepared, and then drilled rods underneath a depth of soil that would capture most of the significant roots. And then they put tubes underneath that and inflated them at very high pressure, and that actually allowed them to roll the tree 80 feet to the south to its new home. So the tree is very happy in its new home. We were really happy to be able to save this tree and preserve it, and now it can be this amazing place where people can sit underneath the shade. And it really anchors the room, which you can kind of see in this view. So the Heritage Magnolia is located back here. And this view, I think, is really helpful to show the suite of rooms that are being provided as part of the exterior experience of the site. And the boxwood hedge that was part of the original Cray design anchoring the space to the north. So we've got this kind of panel here, the garden room full of whimsy and color and texture, and then the lawn panel to sit in the shade or have a picnic, and then the Magnolia. And this also just shows the plinth and then the east garden beyond. So really this suite of rooms that becomes this open urban amenity space, welcoming to all of the visitors who can experience the Folger.
Thank you. A few closing thoughts. This conversation I mentioned that we feel we're having with much admired predecessors can't quit at the largest level of planning. It has to extend to every detail in the building. So I'm going to share with you one particular detail. It is the guardrail that you see at the edge of the plinth, just beyond the existing entry to the Folger on the west side there. That's a change we had to make because we had hollowed out the ground underneath it, and when people would be on the plinth, they could fall off it without a guardrail. So we had to change that. I'm going to focus just for a minute here on how we went about developing this one detail. In addition to the function of protecting individuals from falling off of it, we wanted you to be able to see through it, so you could see through to the Cray building and not block it from below. We also wanted to put the name of the Folger rather boldly on it. The only other place the name occurs literally on the building is in the middle of the front facade. So we wanted to extend it around so there's clarity about welcome in contemporary terms. So it begins at the front door and starts this guard and says Folger there, starts to gently guide you down into the new entry, into the new entry gardens when you arrive on East Capitol Street. We thought about it first in conversation with Cray in this way. All of his letters are chiseled into the building. They're incised into it. These are the opposite of that. They're not incised into it. They're added onto the glass, but they're angled and chiseled, just like the original letters. So that's a sort of a conversation at a detail level, doing the same thing, but in opposite ways. He did it in stone. We're doing it on glass. We're adding to the glass. He's subtracting from the stone. But there was a lot to think about on this. We were concerned that you couldn't see the sign through the glass. So we thought about adding some frit to it, which I'm going to talk about. We then had to think through, how is this lit at night so it's welcoming at night? And details of the top cap and the handrail. These are all things that we architects traffic in every day and revel in, probably mundane to the rest of the world, but I'm trying to give you some insight into how we joyfully spend our days. This is a good day when you get to work on something like this. Jordan, who's in the audience, built these mock-ups actually. So we weren't sure what this would really look like. So we in our shop, our fabrication shop at our studio, built a glass mock-up of the whole thing. We 3D printed, I believe, is how we made those letters, adhered them to the glass. And then we started to look at different kinds of frit patterns we might add to it. And we thought the frit could help the letters and the sign read through a little bit more strongly than they would do if it was all on glass with all the background that you see through it. So we were trying to cut down on the noise behind, but leave the view largely open was the goal. And you can see we're looking in the bottom right diagram at where's the lighting. Is it under the handrail? Is it on the back side of the glass at the ground? Is it on the front side of the glass at the ground? And needless to say, these things, when you do them, they draw a crowd. And everybody's got an opinion, for sure, which was kind of fun. They drew not only Folger folks, but people walking by. But you can see during the daylight that frit pattern starts to add just a little touch of opacity that fades out as you get toward the top that allows it to have a little more presence. Then we did it at night. We looked at the lighting in different locations. In the top left, it's behind the glass. At the bottom, in the top right, it's underneath the handrail. Bottom left, again, behind the glass, but with different frit patterns on it. That's a kind of a fade pattern on it. And in the bottom right, the one we selected, we moved the light to the outside edge. And we thought it really showed off the kind of chiseling of the contemporary letters best, that it created a little bit of a warm glow, an invitation at night. So that's just insight into hundreds and hundreds of details that we have sweated over on this building to tell this story from top to bottom, from the big scale planning moves to every detail in it. And that's what goes into working in and around a building by an incredible architect and an admired predecessor. You have to bring your A game to it. Cray certainly did. Shakespeare is so far beyond A for any of us in the world that, just working around him is an inspiration. So lastly, a few notes on enabling construction. This is a part of design that gets no visibility to the general public. We design a building as we hope it to be when it opens. The builder has to figure out how to design a construction system to make that happen. And that's called enabling design. It's done largely by builders and engineers. They had to support the entire facade of this building, which was supported on the ground, through steel that they added to the frame of the building, and add reinforcement to that steel within the building because it wasn't designed to support the facade. That's what they had to do. They had to literally lift the building up across the entirety of the facade so they could dig this hole to connect the new gallery to the undercroft of the existing building. So the image on the left is where we began. The image on the right is where we were probably about 6 weeks ago. They're about to pour the deck. But you can see the vastness of this undertaking. This is the most difficult way to add to a building, is to build something underneath it. And it seemed like a good idea at the time, I guess. We've had we've certainly had challenges along the way, but you have to support everything above and then intermingle the new design with the old in this ongoing conversation. But to get there, you have to do all this work and then take it all apart so nobody ever sees it. It's incredible. A lot of the technology comes out of Europe to make this happen. They do this more regularly than we here in the U.S. do. So, but you can see a steel beam posted up on 2 cross beams there, supporting one of these new columns, which we had to weld steel to it so we could support it from the sides. And if you look carefully at it, that's Jeff, our wonderful job foreman, in the foreground there. But these are all little pneumatic jacks. They're connected to computers that...
It's not like changing a spare tire.
No, it's definitely not like changing a spare tire. They're connected to computers that monitor movement in the building and settling, and they can be adjusted to millimeters. That's what you have to do, working around an artifact of this import in a location of this import for a writer and donors of, this extraordinary building. This is the extent you go to. So lastly, some building system challenges. Folger had very few systems in it in 1932 when it opened. It had heating, it had some power, it had some lighting, certainly had some plumbing for the toilets, not much more. A contemporary gallery for one of the rarest collection of books on this earth and most valuable collections of books anywhere on this earth, has to be completely controlled. Everything about the environment has to be predictable, controlled, maintained. The only place we could fit it in is under the floor of the new addition. So those are all ducts that are going into, and also they're under the floor in essence, and there's going to be a concrete slab poured on top of it. The theater, it's not air conditioned like the space we're in now. Folger decided to air condition rather late in the project. It was a really smart move because if it didn't happen now, it could never happen. And the seats were all taken out in the right, and there's a mechanical room underneath this theater. We do a lot of performing arts work. This is the last place in the world you would ever put a mechanical room in a contemporary building, is underneath the theater. It's the hand we were dealt. We have into that inserted not only completely new equipment for all the air handlers and the equipment in that mechanical room, but ductwork to air condition the theater with a real low velocity system underneath the floor of the theater. And the modeling we had to do to just fit that in there with the builder was a work of art in its own right. Nobody ever sees it, nobody cares about it, but it's a huge part of designs.
I think someone will name that engine room. I think
hope
that's a,
so.
I think it's a
hope so.
major work.
It's a work of art, it truly is. But so to close, I'm going to take you on a little walk video here into the building. And, I often think of our interiors kind of like, the lining in a jacket, the way Cray thought of his interiors, these wooden interiors that were pulling them through to the outside here. But at the end of the day, the essence of this project is to honor the memory of the Folgers and their gift, the memory of the architect who made it, all in memoriam to William Shakespeare, in a way that makes it into a uniquely American building type, a living memorial. It's a memorial that isn't fixed at a point in time, that can be reinterpreted for each new age, which is necessary for memory. If we don't renovate memory, it's no better than a building that doesn't get renovated. So, and the two are carefully intertwined here in acts of renewal and renovation that bring life for new generations who don't yet know Shakespeare, but need to know him. We all need to know him. He's clearly the most extraordinary writer to ever grace the English language. And his insights as an early modern remain so relevant today that we're sitting here in the National Building Museum, still presenting, as we all do, year in and year out, one of his plays. Think of another playwright. Is there any other playwright who's had this kind of longevity? A few. We still perform some Greek tragedies, but no one's near this. No one may ever be near this status again. So it's worth everything we can do to bring life to it. So, thanks.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks, you guys. It's just so great to hear you talk about the project and all those words that have a RE in front of them, to renew, to renovate. And then I think about, we're in the Folger right now. We're also in the National Building Museum. They're both intertwined in this project. And part of the impulse in this project to perform in this space is to restate and see again and renew our sense of what these stories can do, who can perform them, what audiences can take part in those performances and be inspired by them. Those are hugely important things. And we need to use Shakespeare not so much as a monument, but a doorway that many, many more people can walk through. So that's the journey, and we want people to walk with us. And we've walked out because we left our building to come here, and we want to greet all the people who are inspired by this space. But I do think there are more doorways to walk through, and I'm really looking forward to the day when we all get to walk through the doors in this building with thanks and hopefulness, especially feeling thankful for all of those who invested in this project, our supporters in the Wonder of Will campaign, incredible architects and artists and performers and all of that vision. It's just been a wonderful opportunity to be able to see it all come together. And come together is what it's coming together. That's so exciting about where we are right now. There may be questions, and if you have questions, I will take them and I will say them again because our session is being recorded, and that way they will manage to get to the recording. So the gentleman here, is that your hand? Okay, so the question was, in the master plan, there is a segment behind the Folger building where there could be an addition. So that is in the master plan, but that would be in the future. That's, of course, an incredible opportunity, the last unbuilt parcel of where we are that could be used. But it is in the future. Yes, Myron. Okay, so the question was, there are still steps leading to the two original doorways, east and west, on the north facade of the building. So those are functional. We are not changing that. I mean, really, we want to preserve all of that. But they will become emergency exits. So they're for egress. We want to make the entry so unambiguous that you really want to go down that path and see there's a place for you. So that was a challenge to visually signal that, and the design, the wraparound. You want to say a little about your book
just
wraparound?
that particular aspect of the design was something we really worked over. We wanted to leave the steps open. The plinth is many things. In addition to a doorway, it is where the great bas reliefs are located. I think 7 of Shakespeare's tragedies and comedies. So they're much admired. School children regularly are up there doing class photos in front of them. So we wanted to continue the access, but make it clear that the entrance has now moved. So we've kind of screened a portion of the stair with the glass guardrail coming around. The handrail comes around, signals, go here. The signage will reinforce it. But it's still going to be useful, not only just for egress, but as a place to be in the city and as a place to stand in front of those remarkable sculptures. So
that was one of the most studied part of the project, was how do people view the entrance. Undina, please. Okay, so the question from a docent at the Library of Congress was about the Adams building, which was built after the Folger. I don't know exactly when. Folger is 1932. So her question is, you've used landscape to create access to that building. Is there a way in which these two buildings will be in contact with each other? I kind of heard the hint of a question like, when is the Library of Congress going to redo that landscape? Maybe you weren't saying that. But let's ask our designers and architects how they feel about the two spaces.
do you want to take that on? No? Okay. Well, I think if in the future the south addition occurs, that would be the opportunity probably to do something on that side of the building. Our scope really does not, with this project, work its way around the back of the building. That's for another generation to take on. Maybe Michael later in his career will take that one on. So he's sweating his way through this one, but that's when I would see that becoming a relevant conversation to have. It's a pretty big building compared to the Folger, not nearly so elegant and refined. I hate to be
pour it
critical.
on, Steve. Pour it
I hate
on.
to be critical of it, but it just isn't in the same class, frankly, as the Folger. But don't want to put the Library of Congress down. It's a
This is
secondary
being
building.
recorded.
Hey,
Okay,
we tried to get a job there. They didn't give it to us, so they had the chance.
I do think they have different scales.
Yeah.
And our very interesting thing about the Folger, it's a highly horizontal building, and although it looks monumental, it's kind of almost domestic in its
Very intimate, really
so it's weird in that way. It's an incredibly long building with a lot of marble. I'm not using the right architectural terms, but it has this more intimate feel. So that's why the come down the path, join us, imagine with us in these spaces. It felt like it would work for us. And I'm not sure it would work with Adams because of the size, scale, and actually the dimensions of that building. You had a question. Cafe. Okay, so the question was, is there a chance for a cafe? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And probably a bar. So we just finished plumbing the Great Hall through a very careful process of figuring out how to get water into a standalone bar in that space, and that is done. So in addition to being inspired by great words, I hope you'll come and you'll have a drink with friends and you'll spend time in that space, which, as other domestic spaces, you'll be able to sit and enjoy and talk and engage. But it does help to have beverages to do that.
I've got to say, it's going to be the best bar and cafe in Washington, D.C. Nothing like it.
It will be great. Okay, I see more hands. I'm going to go from left to right. Gentleman in the green shirt. So for the record, and did you think about going up?
Yes, not for very long. I mean, the agency approvals required in the District of Columbia include local preservation authorities, the U.S. Commission on the Fine Arts, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. And across the board, there was a principle that the view from East Capitol Street, when you stand across and look at it, should remain as it is today. And I don't contest that at all, personally. I mean, we do a lot of additions that are above grade, and it's a different sort of conversation, but it was right for this project to not do it, frankly. So, thought about it, not for long.
Yeah. On the U.S. Capitol, up is not really an option because of where it is. So right here, and then we'll go this way. Yes, sir. So the question is, how did the review process help shape and improve the design? I think it very clearly did, and some of that shaping happened actually right up there in the Commission of Fine Arts. But it went all the way from landscape through the full design process. Would you like to speak about that?
Yeah, when you work in the public realm as an architect, you are fair game for criticism from thousands of sources, and it goes with the profession. It's kind of the price you pay for the public life, so to speak. But I will say that the criticism was constructive, not 100%, but pretty close. It provided insightful thought about the project, beginning from within the institution and extending to the outside. Not always in agreement, but it usually pushed us in directions that ultimately became positive. So it's kind of like writing. You need good critics, and architecture in the realm of a project like the Folger is full of them. And for the most part, it was constructive and positive and made the project better.
So the question was, first, thank you for your comment that we are passionate and excited about the project. I think your question was, do you have experience, or how does this compare to your experience, any other project nationally, internationally, in terms of the difficulty of the intervention, conceptual difficulty, engineering design, but how does that feel in the continuum that you know?
Yeah, well, I first want to, by way of background, offer that living memorials are not common in the broad firmament of memory architecture as a type within architecture. My own research into it suggests it's rather uniquely, even to this day, a rather American phenomenon. And it originated really in the aftermath of World War I, when citizens of the United States were saying, what can we do to honor the incredible losses we took as a nation here? And they looked around and saw Civil War monuments scattered about their cities, and they, in some ways, started to ask themselves, how many more of these can we have? And a movement arose around that time that Paul Cray became part of, to look at the establishment of living memorials. Many of them don't function well, in my view, because they have little, that the memory function has little to do with the function of the building. In other words, there's one well-known one in Waikiki, Hawaii from that era. It's a Natatorium. That's a World War I memorial. And It's attached to a swimming pool, Natatorium. Not surprisingly, it's in disuse today because of the disjunction between memory and purpose. So as a building type, there aren't a lot of great examples because they're just coming of age for now for renewal because, they're like the Folger, about 90 years old, in the 70 to 90 year range. So not a lot of experience with this yet. But I find it a really important problem to think about. And you have to engage in it in this really black, it's kind of a gray world. Nothing's right, nothing's wrong in it. How much do you keep of the memory? How much do you change the memory? There's a lot of judgment involved in it, and not many projects yet that I know have really taken it on. And the only other one we're working on now in DC is the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, which is also a living memorial to JFK. Not broadly known. The Folger doesn't really advertise itself in a lot of ways as a living memorial.
We just try to be it.
You just try to be it. The Kennedy Center was designated by Congress as the memorial to JFK. And their problem is a little bit of the opposite of this. The memorial isn't quite present enough, and it needs more presence of JFK in the building rather than just in the name. The Folger's problem is a little bit the opposite. There's almost too much memory along the East Capitol facade that's kind of overwhelming the perception of use. So there's this delicate balancing in the typology between memory and use that is really difficult to negotiate. We're coming up on it nationally. There are going to be more of these. And we do, by the way, have a work opening at the Kennedy Center in September that is an exhibition on JFK and the arts. He's one of our few presidents who really articulated the value of art to democracy and the fact that democracy can't thrive without it. So it's a pretty remarkable exhibit that I think you ought to go see as well. But I have been reflecting on this in light of what's been going on in the monument world since over the last 2.5 years, since George Floyd's murder particularly, but even before that. And one of the problems with monuments is that memories change. Things that seem like a good idea at the time don't seem like such a good idea to another generation. And what do we do with them? Richmond has gone through a very painful process of deconstructing Monument Row. Lots of interesting conversation about it on all sides, but ultimately they took it down. So, but it has gotten me to reflect on why are we continuing to build so many standalone, isn't quite the right word, but dead monuments. They're fixed at a point in time for all time, when we now know that there is no such thing as all time. And why aren't we building more living memorials that allow for the prospect of the future reinterpreting the monument rather than necessarily tearing it down? So that's something, on my mind. And the 9/11 Memorial in New York City, I think, is doing a pretty good job of it. They built a museum with the memorial, with artifacts of the event in the museum that explain the memory more thoroughly, number one. But number two, they give the potential of reinterpreting that memory across time. Mm-hmm. And the Folger lives and breathes the change and evolution of that memory. But to me, it seems like, something we ought to think about culturally a lot more than we're thinking about. And maybe stop building so many monuments and start building more living memorials that do relate memory to purpose, because I think those could have a life.
I think this is a perfect example of why it feels like a great fit to be working with Steve. The things he's talking about are the crossroads where the soul of many institutions are, certainly where the Folger is. And like the books, they're artifacts, but the words in those stories mean something different now, 400 years later. And they're going to mean something different 100 years from now. So creating a living institution that's there to let them breathe, to experiment, to be bold, and to feel like memory can handle a little bit of airing out and a little bit of stretching and a little bit of force sometimes. And I think it's been a graceful intervention in our built environment. But our building does contain a lot of ideas about the importance of history and poetry and the past and books. And we've got to keep interpreting it. We've got to keep performing in that space. We have to make it new. And so I'm just grateful to you and Anneliza, to OLIN and KieranTimberlake for helping us think about how we renew, how we live as a living presence in an institution that is part marble, part glass, part steel, but all heart and soul. And I'm so glad that you've been here to hear this story. We're going to have a reception just on the other side of this theater here, and I look forward to talking to you more. But thank you so much for coming tonight.